Hello AP Biology students, let's go over the 19th section in Unit 3. And in this section, we're going to go over something called anaerobic respiration. Remember, we have two main types of respiration: aerobic respiration that requires oxygen and anaerobic respiration that doesn't require oxygen. The only step of cellular respiration that's anaerobic is glycolysis, or the first step. The prep step, the Krebs cycle, and the electron transport chain are all aerobic, which means they require oxygen. But they kind of require oxygen in a different way. Let me explain. If oxygen isn't present during the electron transport chain, the electrons are going to have nowhere to go. Think of like a bucket brigade that doesn't have an end person that's passing off the buckets. What's going to happen is each person is going to fill up with buckets, and then they're not going to be able to pass those buckets down the chain. So what actually happens is NADH and FADH2 won't be able to drop off their electrons. During aerobic respiration, you're going to have high levels of NAD and FAD and lower levels of NADH and FADH2. However, during anaerobic respiration, the levels of NAD and FAD are going to dramatically decrease since the NADH and FADH2 molecules can't deliver their electrons. So again, what happens here is since NADH and FADH2 can't be oxidized, they're just going to keep on building up until there's no NAD or FAD levels left. So basically what we're seeing here is oxygen not being able to take on these electrons, everything backing up, and then this reaction of the NAD and FADH2 dropping off their electrons won't happen. Now, when that happens, all of the previous steps that produced NADH and FADH2 won't be able to facilitate those reactions, so they're also going to stop. What will eventually take over is fermentation. Fermentation is the anaerobic process where a limited supply or a small amount of ATP will still be produced without oxygen. I like to tell students that a little bit of ATP is better than no ATP. What will happen is glycolysis will still normally react and produce those two pyruvate molecules. Now, our main two types of anaerobic respiration or fermentation are lactic acid fermentation and alcoholic fermentation. And in both of these steps, we're going to see NADH revert back to NAD. You can see that occurring here and also here. This frees up the NAD molecules to go back into glycolysis and keep that step going. Our whole goal here is just to keep glycolysis going, just to produce a little bit of ATP. You can see a better image of what that looks like. You can see glycolysis normally occurring here, but this is that lactic acid fermentation where NADH is going to become oxidized, which allows NAD to go back to this step and become NADH. So there's like a secondary cycle here. And again, this just keeps glycolysis going because if glycolysis stops, then we're not making any ATP. And when we don't make any ATP, bad things happen. And lactic acid fermentation is part of the reason why your body feels sore after a strenuous workout. It's because that lactic acid molecule builds up in your muscles and you start to feel a little bit sore and tired. Alcoholic fermentation is basically a very similar process where pyruvate's going to be changed to something called acetaldehyde and then eventually into ethanol. But you can see this NADH becoming oxidized, which makes NAD, and it's going to go back and fuel again glycolysis. Again, our main thing here is to just keep glycolysis going without oxygen until we get oxygen back again. Because again, if we don't have glycolysis, we don't have ATP. And if we don't have ATP, bad things happen. This is actually how they make a couple different alcohols, such as beer and wine. They'll place a couple substances and create an anaerobic environment in which bacteria will eat the sugars and then basically just make ethanol.